massive amount of science of its use in human medicine. It used to be called a wonder drug for human medicine because it did so many things. It's from a plant, it's a derivative of a molecule from a plant. So if you're into natural things, there you go. But the point is, we have no leadership capable in the United States. It's not. I'm not making this political. We have no real leadership in the United States. There's a leadership vacuum that no one has the willpower, the spine to stand up to the CDC.
But you are, and other people are standing up. I mean, you're standing up to them, and I think there's a growing chorus. The Great Barrington Group, I mean, there's a lot. I think it's a growing chorus standing up because it's just getting to the point of being outrageous. But let me ask this question: what is the risk anyway? What I love about you is you're a great data nerd. I mean, you really understand your statistics and know how to run them, and and I hear different numbers. But what is the mortality rate on COVID?
Because they changed the CT threshold for the vaccinated, we don't know the hospitalization rate. We don't know the infection rate. We don't know the death rate in the vaccinated compared to the unvaccinated. We don't know the reinfection rate. At this point in time, when the director of the CDC announced that they were going to change the CT threshold for the vaccinated, no report can be considered credible unless they show the distribution of the CT thresholds. For some reason, that Barnstable County showed their CT threshold, and it was the same. They had the PCR results on the samples, and it was the same. So that one's valid, and it means that the vaccine efficacy is zero or worse, right? But they don't have survivorship on that. They don't have mortality.
Putting vaccine efficacy aside, which and safety aside, which are very questionable things. The question is, in general, COVID-19 as a disease, when it becomes symptomatic, I'm hearing, the mortality is 0.2%. And now we can go into subgroups, obviously, and younger people, older people, et cetera. But, it seems like there's a bunch of drive and rhetoric that this is like a deadly disease, which is why we are going through these extraordinary measures and vaccine will prevent it, which is why we have to censor anybody who would create vaccine hesitancy amongst people who know how to think. Interestingly, though, the biggest vaccine hesitant population are PhDs, people who have the most education. So they're not prone to people's opinions, they're prone to doing their own reading and research. But or do you have any numbers that you have arrived at relative to what the mortality is of COVID? Should somebody who's unvaccinated, let's not compare vaccinated to unvaccinated from it. Let's just say that there was no vaccine. What's my risk?
Okay, so the most responsible thing that I can say to you is it depends on how aggressively you pursue early treatment.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Your risk of mortality is directly proportional to whether or not you have a doctor that's going to give you a script for something, or whether you're aware of the protocols, or whether you're aware of the supplements that can actually help you get through this in a very good manner. The number one predictor that I know of a serious COVID-19 infection in people who are not vaccinated, this is before the vaccine, is whether you have autoimmunity. So if you already have lupus, if you already have other autoimmune conditions, then you want to do everything that you can possibly do to get the peak shape, peak fitness, clean up your diet, make sure you have sufficient vitamin D around, vitamin A, vitamin C, and all the rest that we all know about, supplementing with zinc and quercetin and everything else prophylactically, and have a handy supply of hydroxychloroquine around, which now I understand you can order from Canada. You can also find a doctor that will prescribe it for you. And when I was saying that there's no leadership, I was saying that there's a change now because ivermectin's prescriptions are soaring. That's the official data. That means allopathic medicines, naturopathic doctors, and so on, osteopaths, everybody's saying, forget it. I'll write you a script. Just forget. Doesn't devil may care whether they come from me or not. I'm going to give you a script. Now they'd like to remain anonymous, but their name's on the script. So the point is we're seeing a stand up movement, and I see signs of a walk away movement where the nurses will not vaccinate and they're taking off from allopathy. And my message to them is it takes about probably less than $500 to create an LLC, and you don't have to be an MD to create a medical facility. You can create a naturopathic facility as a former nurse or a gaggle of former nurses, whatever, and you can start hiring these MDs that are going to lose their jobs because they won't vaccinate. And you can create a viable, vibrant healthcare industry in the United States that is going to be far superior. Now, what do you have going for you? Well, what you have going for you is you don't have brick and mortar, and telemedicine is legal. So if you can compete against standard allopathy through telemedicine, you're going to get a leg up on the market big time because your costs are so low. I think everybody in these new medical facilities should buy into it. So it's more of a cooperative than it is, a corporation. I think that model is in our future. I'm seeing signs of that.
Is it at least reasonable to say this isn't like a killer disease that most people get it are going to, are under threat of death, except for the most vulnerable?
What I'd like to say is that the population, just like the moms had to do with autism, okay, the population has learned for themselves how to deal with COVID. Right? The naturopaths have educated them. Pierre Corey, the frontline doctors, Dave McAuliffe, they've educated themselves where they really don't care what their doctor's opinion is. That's what I'm seeing. It's, there's this huge mental break. There's this huge freedom from allopathic doctors that were saying, oh, you're stupid because you're taking horse medicine. You think you're going to get them to come back to you if you treat them this way? No, you're just driving them further and further away. So you can't shame somebody into submission over something that they know full well has a better chance of saving their lives. And this is how we're winning this argument. We're winning the argument by pointing out that Dr. Fauci's medical prescription for you, if you test positive for COVID-19, is to go home and sicken in place until you need emergency care. Who wants that? Yeah. Who's going to do that? And how long and how many times are you going to do that? Further, when you go home and sicken in place, you develop high viremia and you become the source of new variants.
Yeah.
So we're winning this argument hands down. Do not go home and sicken in place. Get well, get healthy, get vitamin D, get sunshine, get, exercise. And if you develop something like long haul COVID, there's protocols for that too. Look them up with Bruce Patterson, MD. We understand the mechanisms. These are mainstream doctors. We understand the mechanisms by which long haul COVID is taking place. If you're Epstein-Barr positive, Epstein-Barr virus positive, you're a special risk of this. But we understand exactly how to handle it. So look it up and do your own research. And this is why I created IPAC EDU. I created IPAC EDU, Patrick, specifically so that we can educate the public at a level of a college education so that they can interact with the information that they have to figure out for themselves, right? We have great courses that are teaching science and logic and reason. We have this critical readings in COVID-19 and public health. We're teaching statistics, we're teaching study design. It's an amazing, amazing new university, and people don't care if they get a degree. They just want the education. So we're going to dispense with the formalities, and we're going to teach you what you're going to learn, and then you're going to be able to interact in the public square, and you're going to be able to think using the tools of logic, science, and reason. So it's a revolution.
And I think that's what we need is more people to rather than be looked down upon, from these elitists, who want to try to direct society, saying that people can self-empower, which was one of the things that I love what you're doing with IPAC, and I encourage people to get involved and to educate themselves. One other thing, and I don't know maybe if I'm not trying to stick on this because there's a derivative question, but in the actual vaccine studies themselves, I imagine they tracked how many people died that maybe were in there, and I don't know if that could be representative of mortality rates, but one thing that can be calculated is that we keep hearing, or they showed in the headlines, this 95% efficacy, or 95% effective, is how they describe, but they don't describe what effective means. Most people, again, this is where uneducated people would say, oh, the Pfizer vaccine is 95% effective. That means that only 5% of the people who get vaccinated will get the virus, or something to that effect. But that's not what they meant. And maybe you can give just a very layperson short primer on what the relative risk is versus the absolute risk.
So I'd love to, Patrick, but they use PCR to do the diagnosis in the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. How do we know how many people who were vaccinated actually got COVID, and how many people who were unvaccinated actually got COVID? How do we know? We don't know how many got infected, so we don't know if they measured hospitalization rates with the vaccine. Okay, that's a measure that's independent of the diagnosis, right? So if you look at the hospitalization rates data, Moderna looked at this and they put out 95% effective Moderna. But you know, Patrick, they bias the data because if you got COVID after your first dose, they dropped you from the study. So if you got the saline placebo or the vaccine, they dropped you from the study. If you put those number back in, their 95% becomes 75%.
Ah.
It was never 95%.
And what does it mean? It's not 95% prevent you from getting it. It was not 95% prevent you from spreading it. It was just 95% less hospitalization is what they were trying to assert.
Right, which sounds great. 95%. Wow, holy crap. That's a wonderful thing. I have 95 people are going to misinterpret it as saying 95% less likely probability that I'm going to be hospitalized. It almost sounds like, gee, if I don't get vaccinated, I'm going to have 100% probability of being hospitalized. And that's a misinterpretation. You can have a 95% reduction of a 0.01% chance of being hospitalizized.
And that's the absolute risk I'm talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, where the absolute risk is minuscule. And we have a new paper coming out in the journal of Science, Public Health Policy and the Law that actually shows that the number needed to vaccinate and the number needed to harm, given vaccine adverse event tracking data, is like 3 to 1. It's not acceptable.
Explain that. So, when you look at number needed to treat or number needed to vaccinate, explain what that means, and then explain what you're talking about, number needed for harm.
So if you're looking at the number of people that have some adverse event reported, the risk of adverse event reported from the vaccine versus not being vaccinated, you can actually calculate in a vaccination program how many people you have to harm in order to have, save one life or stop
Right.
one hospitalization or stop one infection. And so this publication just came out yesterday. It had been previously published and it was retracted specifically because the two of the editorial board members from another journal, I won't mention the journal name, resigned because they disagreed with the interpretation of the study. And so the study was retracted over interpretation, and never in science do we ever retract papers over differences of interpretation. See, when we do a scientific study, we have, the abstract, we have the introduction, we have the materials and methods, and then we have the results section. If any of that's wrong because of error, you do an erratum or a corrigendum. If any of that's wrong because of fraud, you retract. If any of that's wrong because they made a super huge mathematical mistake or something wrong with their study design, yeah, we can argue for retraction. But the discussion section was always sacred. That was a part where you say, okay, I looked at the data, I ran the study, I looked at the data, and this is what I think it means. That is a submission to the entire scientific community. Do you agree with me? And if you don't agree with me, come and write in the same journal a letter to the editor saying why you disagree with me, right? This idea that you're going to retract because somebody disagrees with your interpretation is ridiculous. So this study was by Wallach et al. And I was actually about to read the study, and all my colleagues and friends were telling me, you got to read this study. It was just retracted. And the authors wrote to me and they sent me the paper and they said, would you republish this in your journal? And I said, they said, it's already been peer reviewed. So please, we hope you would just publish it as is. And I said, no, I'm not going to publish it as is, but I will submit it for peer review. And we sent it to 3 independent reviewers who kicked the pants off of this thing and beat it up and sent it back to the authors. Then the authors sent back a copy back to the reviewer, to me. I sent it to the reviewers. The reviewers didn't like it enough, right? So they that's how it's done in peer review. It's blinded. The authors don't know who the peer reviewers are if you're objective. And so finally, the reviewer said, yes, I agree with the fact that they can make their measurements, they can do their analysis, and they can come to the set of results that they did. But I don't agree causality is implied here. Some of the reviewers did think that causality was implied. I'm the editor-in-chief. I said, that's close enough. Fine, let's publish it. And right now, Retraction Watch is reading all of those reviewers' comments. They wrote to me for the reviewers' comments. And so they're going to have an article, I hope, they're going to have an article talking about, oh, look, here, Dr. Lyonsweiler is returning vaccine safety science to, objectivity and, blinded peer review and unbiasedness. The funny thing is about that particular outcome is that the two editorial board members that resigned, they resigned because they claimed that the authors could not claim that that the vaccines caused the deaths that were reported in the vaccine adverse events reporting system that they used. But one was an epidemiologist and one was a virologist.
Mm-hmm.
And last I knew, neither epidemiologist nor virologist are trained in forensic pathology. So how do they know, right, that the vaccine didn't cause the death? So this is, their opinion is just as valid as the authors. And so it should have been published, and they've made a big mistake by retracting this. So hopefully now we'll return to some more objective publications through journals like mine.
Yeah, well, certainly we need it because I've never seen such retraction activity in my life as I have in the last couple of years, and how papers get published. They pass peer review, they go through the whole process, they get published. Next thing you know, they're retracted because it sounds like science has become pure politics, and that's bad for humanity in a big way.
The goal of our journal is actually to identify instances where the policy or medical practice or law actually has a mismatch between what the science actually says. So by design, given that that's our lane, we're going to be publishing things that are keeping people in track in terms of objectivity. Yeah. And I hope it works. I mean, I only have one life to live for this, right? So I hope it works.
And what a life it is. So, well, listen, first of all, thanks for coming and explaining all these things. If nothing else, the thing to understand is, what it means to be in the midst of this type of a world and this type of heresy. I mean, this really, craziness. But be a scientist who's trying to, constantly push for objectivity and science to be applied. Because what was the catchphrase all along? We follow the science, we follow the science. But what were they really following? Was something quite different than I think what science is. And I think people have to be held to account. And that's what you're doing every day. So I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you, Patrick. I've been a philosopher since my early days in graduate school, where I've read all of the philosophy that I could and studied Karl Popper in particular. And the school, IPAC EDU, is founded on the principle, it's a school of thought called popular rationalism. Because while, the for-profit corporations that bias the science and do tobacco science and things that matter like medicine and glyphosate, right? Well, they don't want empirical objectivity, and they would like it if the Enlightenment never happened, right? We travel from state to state, meeting with people who chant. When I say on the steps of the capitals, what do you want? They say science. When do you want it? Now. I mean, so that's popular rationalism. And the nice thing about this, as a bit of a linguist, if you analyze popular rationalism, what's the opposite of popular rationalism, Patrick?
Unpopular irrationalism.
Unpopular irrationality, and who wants to sign up for that, right? So we win. They're going to play semantic games. I'm down for it. But in all seriousness, people's lives are at stake. People's jobs are at stake. There's a number of tactics that people can do to stand up. If you're threatened, you have to vaccinate or lose your job. Under the 45 CFR 46, Patrick, people cannot coerce you into enrolling into clinical trials. It's illegal. So have your lawyer cite CFR, it's 45 CFR 46, Code of Federal Regulations. Have your lawyer send your employer a letter informing them that they're on notice for trying to enroll them, trying to coerce them in a clinical study, human subjects research trial, and see if they don't back down, because I think they will.
Well, people need to be armed for sure. I mean, I was just reviewing some articles earlier today about professional athletes who basically are losing their positions because they're refusing to get vaccinated. And so people are starting. More and more stands are being taken. It's becoming more and more popular. Eric Clapton just released a song, and we're trying to get him for the series actually right now. So, that his protest, and I think what we need. And he asked the question in an article I saw, where have all the rebels gone, right? And that's what we need now. We need the rebellion. We need the rebels. And it's not, we're not rebelling in the name of irrational, craziness. We're literally saying that we need rational thought here, and we need the truth in the end, which is what we're not getting. Things are being manipulated. It's like puppet strings are being pulled, and it can't be tolerated. And anybody who tries to stand against them, gets slaughtered. I'm sure you have a lot of colleagues that have university-based positions that don't want to jeopardize their position, so they can't speak out. And
I had a stranger show up at my house at 6:30 in the morning, knocking on the door, pleading with me to run a workshop for her colleagues because her husband, who was a major surgeon, has decided that he's going to quit before he's vaccinated. So I ran an all-day workshop, all-day webinar. I had Pierre Corey and other people on for that. And UPMC still hasn't done anything about a mandatory vaccine. I think they got wind of the fact that way too many people are aware of antibody-dependent enhancement, pathogenic priming, and so on. But also, I think they're also very aware that they cannot coerce people into clinical trials. And they have a lot to lose. So what we need are thousands of cases of people suing their former employers, and taking away a chunk of the company, maybe $20 million, and then lawyers were sworn. I mean, this is actionable. You can't coerce. It's the act of receiving the memo. It's not vaccinating. It's not losing your job. It's the act of being coerced. It's like bullying somebody. You can't do it in school. You get kicked out. It's the same thing. You cannot send a memo that says vaccinate or be fired. Now, you might think, well, wait a minute. It's an at-will law here. We can fire you for any reason. That doesn't mean you can send a memo that says you have to vaccinate.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I guess, does that change now though with the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, because now is it still considered experimental?
Anybody that thinks that they're safe because the FDA approved of one of the vaccines doesn't understand 45 CFR 46. You've got to read it, because when you read it, you'll realize that what they're doing is enrolling you in a clinical trial, a human subject study. And this is still a human subject study. Your data will be used to determine long-term safety, as is true with every vaccine. And they can't do that without consent. And we need a judge to rule on that. We don't not sue on the presumption that, well, because the FDA says that they're going to win the case, or because my employer says the FDA says I can do it. Fine, their lawyer can write back a letter to the judge or argue in front of a judge. The FDA says you can do it. Let's have the argument. That's what a civil court of law is for.
Right.
Let's settle where the law actually exists. And we need these competitions. We need about 1,000 cases of people willing to sue to take their employer to court, the former employer, if need be, for damages for the stress of the threat of coercion. That's exactly what we need.
Well, then let's see if we can incite such a thing.
I hope so.
Well, as always, again, very much appreciate you being here, taking the time to share with us. I know you got to be wickedly busy trying to just answer the call of all the stuff you got going on all day, every day. But thank you for giving us this current scenario from the view of Dr. James Lyons Weiler, as far as how your view of the world, which is quite a view, quite a lot of insight and some bombshells that you dropped. So I appreciate you spending the time here and having the courage to do it.
And thank you too, Patrick. And I want to send a shout out to all of the people that follow Patrick and your community, because the amount of outpouring of support, the love that has been sent my way for all that we're doing at IPAC. If you want to get into a classroom with me and you really like what we're doing, come on over to ipak-edu.org and sign up for some courses. These are live courses. It's not one of these online courses where you have to sit alone for more time alone. You get to join a cohort of students and you get to develop community. And so I hope that a lot of people realize that the courses that we have are all designed to empower you in this fight, with knowledge, with logic, with reason, with science. And so much so that I hope in the future people will say, well, I made this argument, and I made this argument because of what I learned at IPAC EDU. We're not anti-vaccine. We don't teach anything that would cause you to not vaccinate. What we teach you is the balance of the science. If the science is balanced, there's this great course by Andre Angelantoni called the Vaccine Course. And it basically is a reference resource material list that he goes through. And he says, if you need the sources on mercury, here it is. Aluminum, here it is. Autism, here it is. and it's a fantastic course. He taught it in Pittsburgh at my invitation in 2017, and now it's online and it's live, and there's just people that are just piling into this course. So I've got to just send out a huge thank you for all the support that your people have sent me, Patrick, and thank you to you and your team for having me.
It's been a pleasure, and I look forward to our ongoing conversations.
Right on, brother. Thank you.
That completes part 2 of my interview with Dr. James Lyons Weiler. Man, what a wealth of information from a guy who's got extraordinary intelligence and also has a heart for humanity. Thanks for being here. Rebecca, thanks for taking the time to have this conversation. What motivated you to get the vaccine?
I wanted to be safe from COVID. I wanted to be able to just live my life normally. I have older parents who, they're in that high risk, they're in their 70s, and wanted to be able to see my parents and not be afraid to get them COVID, because I think they would have probably potentially pretty hard side effects if they were to get COVID, and I didn't want to be responsible for passing it along. So,
and when you got the vaccine, and I'm not trying to ask this as a leading question, just really trying to understand, what did you hear about it? I mean, was your feeling like it was going to be completely safe, or that you didn't have any concerns, or what was your headspace going in?
No, I was not completely. I was hesitant to get it actually, and I waited a while until getting it. So I have friends who we were discussing it, and they're doctors. They work in one is a doctor, one works in the medical profession. And one of them, the doctor, actually was pretty hesitant, saying, this is a new vaccine. Vaccines typically take a long time to develop, so the fact that it's new, it's worth considering. And then the other friend was, but it's safe. The research is showing that it's fine. The trials are there. Everything's there. And so I waited. I was probably the last one in my family to get it. I was maybe among the last people in my friends to get it. I did some research on it. I got on the FDA's website. I was reading about it. Got on CDC's website and read about it. It was very... the information, the fact sheets are kind of dumbed down. There wasn't a lot of information. There was, here are the side effects, which is the typical, if you're allergic to these things, you don't want to get it. If you're immune compromised, you probably want to wait. I'm not any of those. I wasn't any of those things. And, and then you hear, I knew people who had it and they were relatively safe. They hadn't seen any side effects other than, maybe a sore arm or down for a day. And I thought, okay, it's probably okay. It's probably my turn. I'm taking one for the team. I didn't want to get it. I didn't. But I thought, you know what? I think I just need to do this.
And that's an interesting thing, is that I'm going to take one for the team, because I hear people say that a lot, sort of the selfless act, if you will, or, I realize that maybe there's a risk. So you're hesitant, even though, and this is the interesting thing, even though you'd done the reading, nothing really seemed like it concerned you. There still was something that was causing hesitancy on your part. Was it just the fact that, maybe what the doctor told you, hey, this is kind of new and it hasn't had a lot of time to be researched?
Absolutely. That's what it wasn't approved. It was an emergency use. So they hadn't had a lot of time. And how long had it been in trial? So a couple of months, really, if you think about it, when some vaccines take 10 years to develop. This one was really quick. And one of my healthcare friends said, I think it's mRNA has been studied for years, and that's what they're using, and it's safe, and everybody needs to get this. And so I thought, okay, that's probably true, and it seems to be working for people. And so I wasn't going to get it. I was going to wait until it was approved, and I thought, you know what? I want to just be able to live my life. I don't want to have to, if I have to prove that I'm vaccinated. I like to travel, so if it means that I can travel freely, I'm just going to do it. I'm a healthy person. I don't think I'm going to get really sick if I get COVID. I don't know. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it to protect my family, to protect my kids. My kids are little, so, you know, they can't get the vaccine.
That's an interesting part of this too, is the idea of, you were healthy, and that was one of the assessments, right?
Yeah.
I'm actually very, very low risk for having a bad time with
Yes.
COVID. And now it's pretty much understood that natural immunity is a whole lot better than the vaccine immunity, right?
Right.
But with that, and, I guess, how much of your decision was based on, I want to protect my parents potentially, and those considerations, and maybe yourself, versus I want to be able to travel, I want to be able to go to restaurants, I want to be able to have my normal life without impedance. I guess the question I'm asking is, was the compelling force bigger on the health side consideration, or the lifestyle, you want to be able to live your life?
It's probably more lifestyle.
Yeah.
I just wanted to live my life. I wanted to be able to go places and not be, not that anyone was judging me or anything, but I just didn't want to feel that pressure of, oh, you're not vaccinated, oh, you can't come in this restaurant. And in Utah, we haven't felt that really at all. But I didn't want to have to feel that. I worked from home for a year and a half, and so the office was opening back up as well. And it was sort of, okay, well, if we're going to be back in the office and it takes a month to get the vaccination to be fully vaccinated, then I need to do this now in order to return to the office and feel safe in the office as well. So there was sort of that pressure was behind it.
Yeah.
But it was really more about living my life. My parents were already vaccinated, so there was a part of me that thought, and they were selling it, in the beginning they were selling it as you're immune to it. There's this 95% effectiveness, so if you're vaccinated, you're probably not going to get it. Right. So I thought, okay, my parents are already vaccinated. Does it really matter? Probably not, but I want to be able to live my life.
Yeah.
And so,
So the social pressures kind of,
A little bit.
Certainly drive that too. So
Sure.
what happened? So you had you had both shots, right?
I've had both.
So was there any reaction after the first shot?
Yes. So the first shot mostly was the sore arm was the first thing. But then I started to bleed. And so I've had really normal, my menstrual cycle is very normal, very predictable, and it always has
Your
been.
whole life?
My whole life, always. It's always been just very predictable. And I think I had just stopped a period and got my vaccine, and it started right up, right after. And I thought, this is weird. It was alarming because I'm so regular.
Right.
And so I thought, why am I bleeding? Why? And then I thought, well, maybe it's just spotting. Who knows what it is? But after it never went away, I start doing my own little research on, okay, is this a side effect of the vaccine? That's the only thing that's different in my life, is that I just got this vaccine that I didn't want to get in the first place. They don't really know what the side effects are other than these very basic things. After getting on the internet, where you find all our answers, right? I was not alone. I found out that there were a lot of women
A lot of women were
reporting it.
Wow.
But it wasn't being reported as a side effect. And then come to find out that women's health wasn't really part of the trial. It wasn't a factor in there. And so nobody would say, well, yes, this is because of the vaccine. But there were a lot of women who said, my cycle was really messed up after getting the vaccine. And everyone was saying, the stories I was reading was it would correct itself after a couple of months. It seemed to get back to normal.
How long ago was it for you?
5 months.
It's been 5 months. And
Yeah.
has it gotten back to normal?
It has. And so after a couple of months of this persistent bleeding, I finally called my doctor and I said, I'm bleeding and it won't stop, and I think it's because of the vaccination. And they kind of laughed, actually, out loud. The nurse kind of was like, yeah, we've heard that, but there's no evidence to suggest that the vaccine is really doing that. So maybe there's something else, come in and we'll check it out. So I went, saw my doctor, did a series of tests, did some ultrasounds, everything came back normal. And they're like, they basically talked, they're like, well, yeah, you're in your mid-40s, it's probably perimenopause. So
Really?
yeah.
They
so
just want to completely disregard the fact that the vaccine
completely
could cause.
disregarded
Did
it.
you explain to them that there are many other women reporting similar adverse effects?
And they had heard that. They had heard of other women, but they kind of blew it off of just like, yeah, well, there's no evidence to suggest that the
How'd that make
vaccine
you
has
feel?
a side effect. It was obnoxious. I didn't like that they just blew it off. I just thought, there could be something to it. Why aren't you looking into it? If there's other women, and I don't know how many other women in their office were coming in and reporting that, but they knew that was a thing, that women were reporting it. But they just kind of were like, well, we don't know. There's nothing to suggest that is a side effect, so
But
we're going to look at something else.
If I understand correctly, but you're bleeding every day for months.
Every day.
Every day.
Every
It's
day.
not like it's cyclic. It's every day for months, and they're just like,
They're
you're
like, we don't
you're
know.
in your mid-40s.
Yeah, you're in your mid-40s,
Wow.
and I'm thinking, okay, well, does premenopause, do you really just like all of a sudden start bleeding every day?
Right
And they're
after a
like,
vaccine. I mean,
right.
that's just coincidence.
And
Yeah.
they just thought, they was like, yeah, it could happen. It could happen. And so I just dealt with it for a long time. Finally, I called them back. And so my doctor gave me some suggestions. He's like, okay, well, here's what we do for women who are going into menopause. You can take hormones, you can get on the pill, you can have surgery. And I'm like, okay, I don't need surgery. Like, I'm a healthy woman, I think. Like, I don't want to start removing organs. So, yeah.
I mean, so the solution is just rip out your uterus.
Just take your uterus out and you'll stop bleeding. I'm like,
That's beyond
okay,
obnoxious.
I really don't need
That's-
to do that.
Yeah.
So,
Let me ask this: you had the second shot? How long after the first shot did you get the second shot?
it was 3 weeks. It was whatever the
So, but
prescribed.
you already started having the symptoms. Did you have a concern about going back for the second shot?
Yeah, I almost didn't do it. I was like, okay, well, let's see. And the thing with the bleeding is it would be, I don't know if this is too much information, but it would be really heavy and then it would get really light. And then I think, okay, maybe we're done. Maybe this is done. And then all of a sudden it'd come right back. It'd be really heavy and then it'd get really light. So it was on this like weird pattern. And so there was a point in time where I thought, okay, maybe, where I'd had a couple of days where it was like, okay, maybe we're over this. And it was probably right before my second shot. So here I am like 3 or 4 weeks into it.
So you feel like,
and
okay,
I'm
it's,
like, okay, I'm going to try this. I'm just going to do it. And we'll see if the pattern returns. And it never stopped. It just kept going.
And did you notice any other symptoms after the second shot, or was just the ongoing bleeding that was?
No, the second shot, I was sick for a day. So, which I heard was common.
What kind of sick?
Really tired. And so it started, I had my shot in the evening the night before, and then the next day I was still working at home, and so I was sitting at my desk, and it was, as the day progressed, I was just like, I felt like a zombie. Like my bones hurt, like everything hurt. It was just like heavy and tired. I could not keep my eyes open.
Wow.
And so at some point in the day, I think I called into the office and just said, I have to step away. I can't keep my eyes open. I don't feel good. And they were very good about that. I think several people had felt that. So that lasted, it was probably 12 hours of that. Like by the end of the night, that evening I was feeling better and I felt like I could actually move and get up and be functional, but that was the
So
worst
now,
of it.
and then you went, and then you said it was about 5 months of constant bleeding or so, right?
Yeah.
And the doctors didn't want to give it any. They were now saying, well, let's just take your uterus out. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
I just have no words
That
for
was an option.
the absurdity of that.
Yeah.
So did they say, hey, we should probably report this to the vaccine adverse reporting system so people can know about this? So if
They never said that. And in fact, not until recently did I read, and maybe it was on the CDC's website, where if you report a side effect to your doctor, that they are actually supposed to report that. They have some sort of reporting system.
they have a reporting system, but
And I don't know how new
now,
that
and I've
is,
interviewed
or-
other people who said, well, the doctor told me to report it, and getting on the site to do it. So it seems like a lot of things are going on, and a lot of people are having adverse reactions, but nobody's reporting it so it can be tracked and that we have data on it to really know what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like flying blind.
Kind of.
You told me a story about a friend of yours who was having health challenges already but got the vaccine. So
Yeah,
tell
so
me
she was waiting. So she just, this whole time she said, I'm just going to wait.
What's her
It's-
health challenge?
She has multiple sclerosis.
Okay.
So she decided, I'm going to wait. I've got this issue. I don't know how it's going to impact my health. So she just got it 2 days ago. She got the vaccine, and she texted me, and she because she knows what my problem is, she was asking me, how is it going for you? And says, I just got the vaccine and I'm bleeding.
Wow.
And she's like, and I'm freaking out. It's not normal. She said, it was almost identical, where she had just ended her period and she got that vaccine and almost immediately started bleeding again. And she said, she said, and it just keeps getting heavier and heavier. It's not, she keeps thinking, I hope it goes away, but it's not going away. And so this, because it was not even 2 days. She got it 2 days ago. She texted me yesterday and said, oh, how are you doing? Oh, has it stopped for you? And so anyway, I told her sort of the path I've been on since then. And it's yet to be seen. I said, keep me posted. Let me know, how this affects you going forward. I hope for her that it doesn't last 5 months, or that it doesn't have any other side effects for her. But she was hesitant to get it, and and I had told these friends my story. I don't know, maybe a month or two ago when we were, it's just a conversation we've all had. I just find it interesting that there's another person in my inner circle.
In your circle, I'd say.
Yeah.
So, well, Rebecca, I appreciate you having the willingness to come and sit down in our studio and share your story and your thoughts. I very much appreciate the research you've done on your own and the fact that you're willing to come here and share what your personal experience was.
Thank you.
That concludes episode 5 of our 9-part docuseries, COVID Revealed. We're moving down the track now. We're still in the free viewing period. Just know that you can get these packages of COVID Revealed. You can own it at a steep discount during this free viewing period. I want to thank you if you've already invested deeply from our hearts. Gratitude for supporting this work. We're very passionate about it. And if you haven't already invested, maybe now's the time to take a look while we're still in the free viewing period. That's where you're going to get the best discounts and the best bonuses. So thanks for being here for episode 5. I'll see you in episode 6.
I thought vaccines were the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't even know what a vaccine injury was. So it was sort of a big paradigm shift not to trust the CDC. Informed consent was thrown out the window a long time ago, even prior to the COVID vaccination, because the CDC and the FDA are withholding information regarding vaccine adverse events. In the Pfizer clinical trial, the data that they submitted, there were 20 people that died in the vaccinated group and only 14 people that died in the unvaccinated group. So yes, they touted that it was going to ameliorate symptoms, lower hospitalizations, and prevent deaths, but even their own clinical data show something different.
A lot of what this is about goes beyond the vaccination. It's about this social control, being able to control people and move your societies, control your nations through a passport that will begin with your vaccine records, but then it will be your social credit score, something that they've been working on in China, right? Are you a good person? Are you making good decisions based on what the government wants you to do? And all of those things affecting whether you can get a loan, whether you can buy a house. All of this is in the future. Remember, the Constitution doesn't give us rights. It protects our inalienable rights, our God-given rights. It's a protector, not a decider. The Constitution doesn't control the people, it controls the government so that they don't control us.
These vaccines have not assessed safety, and we do not know, even for those who have taken it, what the future would be. And nowhere in the entire world did these lockdowns work. In every instance, they failed. They did not reduce transmission, they did not curb death. Sweden looked at the 2 million Swede kids, 16 years and under, since the beginning of the pandemic. No lockdowns, no masks, no school closures, no instances of death. They have provided no evidence, none, as to why low-risk children should get these vaccines.
Next up is my interview with Barbara Loe Fisher. I have known Barbara Loe Fisher for decades. She is an amazingly courageous human being who is the mother of a vaccine-injured child and started the National Vaccine Information Center. And the impact that she's had over these years has been extraordinary. As a matter of fact, she was in this game way before a lot of other people were, when she was out there saying that we need information and informed consent when it comes to vaccinations. And I have to tell you, the work that she's done has had an impact throughout the entire world. She's knowledgeable, she's articulate, she's passionate, and she's someone that I'm excited to share with you right now. Let's jump in. Well, this is certainly a conversation I've been looking forward to because the first conversation I think I had with you was decades ago. and here we are. And I almost wanted to start, Barb, this conversation saying, boy, with all the years of experience that you have in the realm, and we'll talk about that in a moment, could you have possibly have anticipated that you'd live to see this day? And I think the answer you're going to have is yes, because you did talk about this years ago. So first of all, thank you for being here and taking the time. And can we jump in and just get into your background? How did you get into doing, for now decades, what you're doing, and how has it led to this day?
Well, it was the experience I had with a severe reaction to a fourth DPT shot my firstborn son, had in 1980. And at that time, as you know, really very few people knew anything about vaccine reactions. Doctors were not discussing this with the mothers who brought their children in for vaccination. There was no information that vaccines carried significant risks for some people, and that sometimes they didn't work at all. And so I took my baby and my son in, not knowing anything really. And when I witnessed his reaction, but didn't understand what I was witnessing in that fall of 1980. A convulsion, a collapse shock, a state of unconsciousness that I kept writing off as just a really long nap, but he wasn't moving in his bed. I mean, if you don't know, you don't understand what you're seeing. And when he regressed physically, mentally, and emotionally after that shot and became a totally different child, none of us understood in my family what had happened. The doctors told me it was just a stage he was going through and not to worry about it. But, I knew that something had happened and I didn't connect it to what I had witnessed that day. It wasn't until I saw DPT Vaccine Roulette, which was a documentary in the spring of 1982, that really was the first time that parents in this country had been warned that the DPT vaccine could cause brain injury and death. And as I watched that program, I knew my son was not as severe and profoundly damaged as those children, but I knew what had happened to him that day. And my mother, who had gone with me to the doctor's appointment, we called each other and we knew at that point. And it was then that I called the TV station and I was put in touch with other parents of DPT vaccinated children in the Washington, D.C. area. And we got together and we founded in 1982 the organization known today as the National Vaccine Information Center, a nonprofit charity. And ever since that the time that we got together, our mission has been to prevent vaccine injuries and deaths through public education and to defend the informed consent ethic. That is the ability to make a free and voluntary decision about medical risk-taking, which includes vaccine risk-taking.
So that was back in the 1980s, as you described, and through that time, you have been a resource basically for the world to be able to come to nvic.org, learn about vaccines, learn about the risk, and in essence do the job that informed consent is supposed to do, where people can make a decision, or in this case, parents can make a decision about their children and know the risks and understand it in an objective manner, which the agenda for vaccines wasn't allowing that to happen. But you also were able to look at the inside of this, being on maybe boards or maybe councils or what have you. Were they at the FDA, or what agencies were you able to be the layperson, to be present for some of these meetings?
Well, after our organization worked in the early 80s with Congress on the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which a lot of people don't understand what that law was when it was passed. For the first time in history, the government admitted that vaccines can cause injury and death with that law. We were responsible for the safety provisions, the informing, recording, and reporting and research safety provisions. We fought very hard to continue to have liability for the industry, pharmaceutical industry, when we had medical trade and pharma and government trying to let them totally off the hook. When that law was passed, the companies still had liability in civil court for design defect. The doctors still had liability for medical malpractice. But over a series of 20 years, Congress and the federal agencies gutted both the safety provisions and the compensation provisions. And then in 2011, the US Supreme Court majority, with Sotomayor and Ginsburg dissenting, let the companies off the hook totally for civil liability for vaccine injuries and deaths, even when you could show the company could have made a vaccine safer. At that point, from 2011 to right now, is when most of the damage has been done in terms of forced vaccination policies. But what happened after that law was passed was I was put on as a consumer representative, FDA, the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee, Institute of Medicine Vaccine Safety Forum. I participated in public engagement projects with the CDC. And it was those years that I spent at the table with what they call vaccine stakeholders. That includes the pharmaceutical industry, the state and territorial healthcare officials, the federal government, the American Academy of Pediatrics. It said all the people who are involved in the mass vaccination system. It was then that I understood what the end game was. The end game has always been forced vaccination without the ability to say no. And and that's when in the early 90s, when I started talking to chiropractic conferences, which is where I really developed the ability to, I had never really publicly spoken before. And I was able to, with these amazing chiropractors who, I call them the principal chiropractors, who supported informed consent and choice, that I was able to articulate what I knew, what I was finding out. And I predicted that the day would come when we would not be able to function in society without having every government recommended vaccine. Now, a lot of people, they liked my speeches, but they rejected this idea that we would at some point be in an Orwellian situation like we're finding ourselves in today. But you know what? I never thought I would live to see the day. I thought my children and grandchildren would be the ones who would have to grapple with this government overreach. And to find myself witnessing what I predicted is surreal and is it's very disturbing. But at the same time, I feel so strongly that the spirit of freedom that lives in the hearts and the minds of Americans, that is what is going to save us. That we have always, our country since our founding has been fundamentally centered around the idea of autonomy and individual liberties and minority rights. And I think that even though we're going through this dark time, I believe that in the end, Americans will stand up for their liberty.
Are you seeing signs of that now? We're seeing in, first of all, in America, where it's been, there's been a lot of compulsion, censorship, which I want to talk to you about in a few moments, and all of the political drives towards getting everybody vaccinated, that we're only, a little bit over 50, maybe 55% of the populace has gotten both vaccines. Does that imply resistance, in the American spirit on your part, from your view?
I think we've been in a state of shock here in America in the last 20 months. I think Americans have been very slow to really understand what's happening. If you look at Europe, where they went through World War II, and they understand and still remember what tyranny looks like, they are the first populations in the last year and a half to stand up in massive numbers in public demonstrations of hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Paris, London, Berlin, Rome, Athens, they led the way, really. And we are now seeing in this country protests like the teachers union protest in New York City with a march across Brooklyn Bridge. We're seeing CEOs who are resisting the call by the current administration to require all, if they have a company over 100 employees, to require them all to be vaccinated or lose their jobs. We're seeing healthcare workers standing up and literally leaving their jobs on principle, the principle of informed consent, and against forced mandatory vaccination. They know, I believe, that the next order they're going to be asked to obey is to deny treatment to the unvaccinated. This is a very serious situation. And it has everything to do with the right to autonomy, which is the first human right, the right to protection of bodily integrity. If we give that up, we're lost. So what have we seen with Europe leading the way? We're now seeing Americans from all walks of life, from every socioeconomic class, from every faith-based community, from every political party. This is not about political parties. It is about fundamental human rights. And I think Americans are starting to understand it. And I think we will see more resistance as time goes on. I want to say that one of the things that is very important for people to understand so that they can have hope is that we have this year in the legislative session of 2021, we have, because we've been organized for about 11 years at the state level, the National Vaccine Information Center, through our NVIC advocacy portal, we have been able to stop mandates in the states. Not one state in this country this year voted to mandate the COVID-19 vaccine. This gets lost in the rhetoric and in the media coverage that is emphasizing that these mandates are going to happen. So I'd like to leave people, with that kind of hope and understanding that if they get involved at every level of government, at local, at county, city, state, they can make a difference by developing personal relationships with their elected officials. And if they don't like what the elected officials are doing, they can vote them out in the next election. We need to take back our government, and we need to work the system rather than standing outside of it. And so I believe more people are understanding that.
It's a really important point that you just made. And because I think when we're looking at the activism, it's not just a debate around the science of this, COVID vaccine and, was it properly safety tested, et cetera, et cetera. All those things matter. But we're really looking at a bigger, civil liberties issue as far as our individual rights, et cetera. And that's where the protest comes. Are we properly informed? Do we have, call it medical liberty? Do we have economic liberty? Shouldn't we be able to go to work, if we decided that through informed consent we don't want this, this vaccine? So, what are the most effective ways that people can activate, that they can be effective in their activism?
Well, again, I put the emphasis on developing personal relationships with your elected officials. I also advise, sheriffs are elected officials as well. We shouldn't underestimate the sheriffs in this country. We need to talk with members of the armed services, our military personnel and our police, to remind them about the value of protecting human rights and civil liberties. So if they are ever asked to act in an authoritarian way that crushes civil liberties, they will make the right choice. If you look at the greatest tragedies in history, it's about people following orders instead of taking individual responsibility for the actions that they take. And I might also add that I am a supporter of working the system, but I'm also a supporter of nonviolent civil disobedience. And I put the emphasis on nonviolent because when you engage in violence to try to change something, it only emboldens and also makes it easier for those who want to take away our autonomy to do it. So if you look at the great social movements in history, the civil rights movement, what Gandhi did, the most effective means was For example, when you sat in at a restaurant or sat on the front at the front of the bus and refused to move. We can never devolve into violence. It's not a solution. The solution is intelligent action and responsible action within the framework of our government. Our founders left us with an amazing government that had three tiers: local, state, and federal. Right now, federal is out of control. The executive branch has garnered too much power since in the 21st century. It's inappropriate. And the states can balance that out, but we need to work the system and not think that somebody else is going to do it for us, because that's the way we lose our liberty.
Have you been tracking at all, state by state, their edicts or lack thereof around COVID, around quarantine, around masking, et cetera, have been quite varied. Yet, if there was validity to the restrictive orientation on masking and separation, et cetera, you would see radically different outcomes in those states, and we're not seeing it. So how do you think this will play out?
Here's the thing: Jacobson versus Massachusetts, the US Supreme Court decision 1905 that affirmed the constitutional authority of the state legislatures to mandate vaccines. Not the federal government, the state legislatures. Okay, this is one of the reasons that we're seeing the people getting involved and holding back the mandates in the states, the laws that would be passed by state legislatures. It's why we're seeing the federal government frustrated with the states not cooperating and trying to go around the fact they can't mandate vaccines, and asking the CEOs of corporations and private employers, and of course the executive branch, the federal government can tell the executive branch that they can't work there unless they get vaccinated. But at the local level, that's where we're seeing some of the mandates. The governors, through their executive powers in the states, we've seen a number of governors mandate the vaccine. We've seen a number of city officials mandate the vaccine. Remember, these are elected officials. If you don't like what they did in your state, then you need to make a change in the next election. The people have the power to change things. And I think a lot of people feel powerless right now because we've been slapped around pretty good. The last 20 months, we have been kept in constant fear, chaos, policies that change on a daily basis. People are confused and they're afraid, and need to not be afraid. That is the way people become paralyzed, and that's when they can be exploited and abused by people in positions of authority who are engaging in overreach. So I feel both disturbed and by what I'm seeing, but I also know that, this issue that we've been working for 40 years is now the #1 topic in the entire world. The vaccine system will never recover from this because they engaged in overreach. Every vaccine that comes out from now on will be highly scrutinized by the public all over the world. In a way, what they've done has finally clarified what the issue is and has drawn the lines in this war, what I call a culture war. And people now understand what it's about. And as you said, it's about liberty.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, the thought of them overplaying their hand at this point, maybe it's an arrogance that, that these dumb people, are going to just fall in line. I think maybe they've underestimated. But, you said something that I think is very profound when it comes to Jacobson. And, just to understand it, Jacobson, is a 1905 case that is the defining case on, a state's rights to force people to be vaccinated, or what compulsion they might have to be able to get people vaccinated. And, but this is really interesting because even though it's a Supreme Court case, it upheld the state's rights to do it. There's no federal mandate or federal right or precedent that they can do it from a federal level. And I guess this is where what people need to understand, And as you cited, the federal government doesn't have control of, there's some states that align with it and many, maybe even a majority that do not. So they just can't get their agenda done.
That's right. Now we have to remember the federal government has authority over people crossing the borders of the United States and the territories of the United States. They also have, importantly, control over interstate commerce, over the crossing of state borders. There are already people who are urging the current administration to pull the trigger on interstate commerce, which means you cannot you potentially could not cross state borders without being vaccinated. This is coming into play by a law. There's a bill that has been introduced in Congress called, I believe it's called the Safe Travel Act, which would bar people from flying from one airport to another or getting on an Amtrak train and going from one state to another unless they've been vaccinated. So we need to take these things seriously, because those who are determined that there shall be no exceptions to vaccination and that your life can be destroyed if you dissent are not going to give up. And we have to be equally as firm about defending human rights and the human right to informed consent to medical risk taking.
Based on what you're seeing, what is your level of optimism or pessimism that the rights and liberty will prevail?
I think the answer to that question is still unknown. I think that I'm a glass half full type of person, and I believe that in this country, as I said before, the spirit of freedom and civil liberties, minority rights is something that has been so fundamentally a cultural value in our society that I believe Americans will stand up and fight for that right. I'm hoping it will be done in the right way. And as I said, I believe in self-discipline. I believe in a disciplined and responsible approach to social reform. Because in really what we're talking about is social reform. And this mass vaccination system has become far too powerful. The people that operate it have been given way too much power. And we need to take back the power that we have. We're 333 million people, and we can certainly change this if we act and don't just be apathetic and think somebody else is going to do it for us.
Now, you had previously mentioned, in activism, getting to know your legislators, maybe on a state and federal level. Also, you said don't underestimate what it means to have relationships with, the police or sheriff department, et cetera. That it's good to have these people in a conversation prior to things escalating to where they might go. Right now, there's so much censorship in social media. I'm sure you've been the victim of it. Where people are trying to express themselves in a public manner, and we're seeing censorship that I've never seen before in my lifetime. So, what other advice do you have for people? In addition to what we described already.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about the fact that one of the ugliest and most dangerous aspects of what has happened in the last 20 months has been so many people engaging in demonization and dehumanization of people who dissent from government policy and who are standing up for informed consent rights. This is very dangerous. People are being pitted against each other. Families have been broken apart. Neighbors no longer speak to each other. Friends have been lost. It's a very dangerous situation, because if you look back in history, that's always the way tyranny has begun. And that is by identifying and ostracizing certain groups of people in society. So I wanted to say that first. But censorship, one of the ways that NVIC was able to get beyond the fact that parents weren't being told anything was when the internet formed in the early 1990s. And we were one of the first websites on the internet. Our website, nvic.org, was created around the time that the CDC created their website. So we are the oldest and largest of the organizations on the internet that have been disseminating information about diseases and vaccines. We got right in there on social media and immediately got hundreds of thousands of followers. When we have held 5 public conferences on vaccination over the years, starting in 1997. In 2020, we held online the 5th International Public Conference on Vaccination because we had to cancel the hotel because of the social distancing restrictions. As soon as that conference, which featured over 50 credentialed speakers, was held online, we were attacked by a political operative in the United Kingdom. And what he did was he said, these people are basically characterized as enemies of humanity, you know, because we were having a discussion about vaccine science, policy, and law. And he said they should be taken off of social media. I was number 1 on the hit list at that time when he put out the anti-vaccine playbook, the Center for Countering Digital Hate out of the UK. And then what happened was I opened up that conference. It was a pay-per-view conference. We had to create a whole new website in order to hold the conference and protect it from sabotage. But after he attacked us, I opened up the conference in 2021 to everybody for free. As soon as I did that, in March, NVIC was deplatformed from Facebook. In April, we were deplatformed from Instagram. In May, we were deplatformed from Twitter. NVIC is now the most censored of all the organizations disseminating information. We're off of 3 of the 4 major social media platforms. So we have gone to alternative platforms, but it is, you know, we don't have at this point the reach we used to have. But I have faith that these alternative platforms are going to grow larger, and they are committed to freedom of speech. This is the way we have to respond to this what I call the move toward authoritarianism in our country. We can do it by people who understand what's happening, creating new ways to communicate, creating platforms that are safe and open.
You know, what's interesting is that it wasn't something at least the way you described it, it wasn't something you did on Facebook that caused Facebook really to deplatform you. It's because you held a conference, and now they're saying, you know, I guess they used an excuse, you're somehow violating community standards, but it really wasn't about your posting. That wasn't changing. It's just the fact you held a conference, so you're kind of targeted as an enemy, and now they're all going to act against you.
Yeah, what happened was the Center for Countering Digital Hate and other groups basically went to Congress. I mean, Congress got involved and told the social media platforms, well, not all of Congress, but certain people in Congress, told the social media platforms, you have to take anyone who's engaging in disseminating misinformation off of social media. Well, you know, we were targeted, and yet our pedigree is 40 years long. We worked with Congress in 1986 on the biggest piece of legislation that's ever been passed in this country on vaccination that was supposed to make the vaccine system safer. And I have sat on government advisory committees and presented at the Institute of Medicine. I mean, there's no other organization that has the pedigree that NVIC does. So obviously we were supposed to be taken off of first, and we were.
Yeah, and this is the crazy thing. It's, you know, they call it misinformation or disinformation, but, you know, you're usually posting things and sharing things amongst, like you said, the people in your, you know, are well-credentialed experts who have a right to speak to the topic and talk about, you know, their research or their views, what have you. And somehow that turns into misinformation. So
we reference everything. If you go to we have 3 websites, nvic.org, nvicadvocacy.org, which is our political action, you know, advocacy. And then we have the vaccinereaction.org, which is a weekly journal newspaper that we publish breaking news about vaccines and related topics. We are so careful about referencing, using the medical literature, using the mainstream media articles. We try very hard to have very reputable sources that we reference. And I think it's because we have done it that way that we're considered a threat.
yeah,
Because we've documented everything. We use government documents, the CDC. We're not afraid of linking to the government websites. into the medical literature, because we know that people need to look at all the information and feel comfortable with it in order to make an informed decision. NVIC does not tell people what to do. We do not make vaccine use recommendations. That's not our role. Our role is to provide information that people can use to make their own informed decisions. That's about what informed consent is about.
Well, so what's startling to me is, this UK group is the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Have you ever investigated them, or is it a guy in his pajamas in his kitchen, who puts up a website? I mean, what do you know about that group?
He's basically associated with the Labour Party in Great Britain, and is a political operative, and he it's a very shadowy organization. It has an office in the United States, I think in the DC area. The British law does not require organizations like that to divulge who their funders are. So it's not a lot is known about them, but they've done a lot of damage, not just to NVIC, but to a lot of other organizations as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how these things come out of nowhere. They've got no pedigree. I mean, they haven't been around for 40 years, doing work or whatever. They just suddenly spout out, have a name, you can't really find out much, if anything, about them, except that they're political operatives. And next thing you know, why, our Congress or people in our legislature are giving them the time of day. And the question is, why would they, except that they're helping to, give cover for a narrative that they're trying to create.
And Silicon Valley is very much involved in this. The big corporations that operate the social media platforms have basically gone along, and then these fact checkers that have cropped up in the last decade that serve as arbiters of truth online, they are very connected to this political operative, to certain government agencies and colleges and universities. It's really about, when I started speaking to the chiropractic community, and I understood that there was this whole community that was committed to a holistic approach to health. And when I was able to meet Dr. Joseph Mercola, who has been a supporter of the National Vaccine Information Center since 2008, and is also holistic. He takes a holistic approach to health. This battle that we're in right now is not just about vaccination. It's about whether or not in this country we're going to have the right to make choices about the kind of healthcare, preventive healthcare particularly, that we want for ourselves and our children, or whether the government is going to make those choices for us. And so, when you take a step back, you see that this is about so much more than vaccination on so many levels. And that's why I call it, a culture war. And I say that it's we both agree, it's about civil liberties. It's about freedom of choice.
One of the things that might be a bright spot as far as what we're describing here is the fact that these alternative platforms like Rumble.com or BitChute, where they're allowing people to post, and without editorializing. And that was a whole other thing, is saying that these people have no accountability. When I say these people, these tech platforms like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, what have you, they have no liability for what gets posted. And their reason for enjoying that liability is they said, we don't editorialize. Well, now they're editorializing, which means they should have the same liability that a newspaper would have should they publish anything that's inaccurate, defamatory, etc. But now we do have these other platforms that are growing, and I think unwittingly they're taking what were these obscure platforms in social media, and they're turning them into pretty popular platforms that are growing by the day in leaps and bounds. So do you feel like they'll get to an equal footing again, where other platforms will start to have a big enough audience, enough people will become aware of them that we can get this information out freely again?
Look, in America, it's always about building a better mousetrap, building a better option for people. And I think that more and more people are going to these alternative sites because they know they can get the unvarnished truth. It's not censored. One of the most exciting things that I've seen happen in the last 2 years has been the emerging of scientists and physicians from mainstream medical thought and from the scientific community coming forward and risking their careers to speak the truth as they see it. I think one of the scandals that is going to be uncovered as this whole thing develops has been these one-size-fits-all protocols that have been applied in hospitals. The attempt by government, well, not the attempt, the actual, I mean, they did it. The government at the outset prevented the repurposing of licensed drugs and supplements, et cetera, to be able to use to help people in the early stages of COVID-19 survive the SARS-CoV-2 infection. This to me is medical malpractice and really criminal. It's on a criminal level that there's been an active opposition to trying to help people get through. So many people who go into these hospitals are automatically vented and they don't come out alive. There's a high mortality rate. It's a one-size-fits-all protocol, and people begging to have alternatives once they get into the hospital and they're denied and they cannot meet with their families. It's terrifying. And I think that this scandal is going to be eventually fully revealed as we get further along in this, I don't know when it's going to end, this oppression that we're seeing surrounding this pandemic. But again, I'm encouraged by the scientists and physicians because it's very hard, as you know, to go against your colleagues. When a policy is set and you go against the grain, you basically can be destroyed. And yet they're coming forward, and that's exciting.
Yeah, I think there's a growing chorus of people that are coming from the mainstream in medicine who, fortunately, they have a conscience, and they're willing to speak up against what they know is wrong, and of course at great peril to their livelihoods and their careers, as we're seeing, and to me, every one of those probably represents numerous others that basically can't afford or feel like they can't afford to speak out even though they know what's going on is wrong. So and I think what's incumbent upon all of us, I mean, this is a moment in time, it's a moment in history, it's an unprecedented moment, and I don't know what people see when they look in the mirror when they get up in the morning typically, and I don't know if they say, oh, I'm an activist, I'm someone who can make a difference, I'm someone who shows up at rallies or contacts my legislator. They're probably have never done this before, but it's required. Here we are. It's this this epoch in time. Here we are right now when it's happening, and whatever you thought your self-image is, maybe you have to shift this now and say, I need to get involved. The stakes are too high for me to remain silent. What final thoughts or words do you have for our viewers?
Well, speaking to your point, I say people can be heroes in their own communities. They can choose to do the right thing. They can choose freedom over fear. And I think that we all have these choices to make, and those choices define our lives. And so I urge everyone to take this seriously, to stand up for liberty, do it for your children, your grandchildren, for generations to come. And I often say, if the state can track down, and force individuals against their will to be injected with biologicals of known and unknown toxicity today, then there will be no limit on which individual freedoms the state can take away in the name of the greater good tomorrow. This is a defining moment. And we either are going to pass this test and protect our liberty, or we're going to fail and live as slaves.
I think those are literally the two alternatives. So I appreciate, as always, you being a clarion voice in these matters, and thank God you're doing what you're doing, because your voice is more important now than I think it ever has been, since you started doing this work back in the 1980s. So thank you first for doing all you're doing, and thank you also for taking the time to be with us here today.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see you and to have this opportunity to communicate with your audience.
That concludes my interview with Barbara Loeb Fisher. I don't know where the world would be without people like her who are willing to step up, be a voice, and do it for the long haul. She hasn't been around this for just a year or two. She's been in this game for a long time, and she has impacted a lot of lives for the better. So thanks for taking this time and letting me share this interview with you.